feel safe on their streets. They feel like, in many respects, New York's been attacking their wallets, their safety, their freedom, their kids' education. That's why New York leads the whole country in population loss. And one of the changes that New Yorkers have long been calling for is for a repeal of cashless bail. They want a major overhaul to this legislation. Law enforcement needs it. Our judicial system needs it. Our streets, our subways should belong to law-abiding New Yorkers. They shouldn't be turned over to criminals. Now, Kathy Hochul had a decision to make. Her strategy was to not propose any change whatsoever to cashless bail in her executive budget. As a matter of fact, she said that she needed to see data, even though we all have seen the data. She could count the amount of press clippings on her desk of people who have been victimized due to cashless bail, but she said that she didn't have any data. We went through the entire process of the Assembly and Senate each passing their one-house budget resolutions, and still, Kathy Hochul, Brian Benjamin, did not propose any changes to cashless bail. But then she had a really bad week last week. At the beginning of the week last week, we saw a New York Post story on a new poll that had me beating her 45.5% to 44%. Somebody had a bright idea inside of Hochul's office to send her to drop the first puck at Madison Square Garden. That didn't go so well. She was booed and roasted out of Madison Square Garden, and it was predictable if you think about it, because the people going to the game, they don't feel safe on the streets of New York City or in the subways to get to the game. Maybe their parents. Maybe they are thinking about their own breaking point in the state. And then Andrew Cuomo, he's emerged, claims that he's been vindicated, which he clearly hasn't. I'm sure that there's some regret in the state legislature for not impeaching him, not going far enough, because here he is thinking that he has been vindicated unselfishly. I would say that he should be as far away from elected office as possible, as far away from power as possible. He's fortunate that the Sunday morning sermons that he gives inside of churches are not being given from inside of a prison. For the people of New York, they're still demanding justice and accountability with Andrew Cuomo. But this was bad news for Kathy Hochul. So she wakes up one day towards the end of last weekend, a light bulb goes off. We need to make changes to cashless bail. We do. But she wants to get a little too cute for half. She wants to make some changes around the edges. The people of New York are calling for a massive overhaul of cashless bail. They don't want just a few of the most serious felonies to create a situation where judges would have discretion. The people of New York want judges to have discretion on all of these offenses, to be able to weigh dangerousness and flight risk and past criminal record and seriousness of the offense. Kathy Hochul only wants to make a small change to some of what she describes the most serious felonies. She decided to wait until we were very, very late in the game with the budget. Yesterday, the Speaker of the Assembly and the Senate Majority Leader made it clear that they don't have the will to do the right thing here. So strategically, she has really left all New Yorkers in a bind. Our law enforcement, our judicial system, people want to feel safe on the streets. Our state legislators who have been fighting for changes to cashless bail strongly, consistently, effectively, and they're here today, here in front of you, willing to answer any questions you have. Now, if Kathy Hochul and Brian Benjamin were really that serious about using the power of the bully pulpit, about using the power that the people and public polling and all of the forces calling for change, then you would be in front of the cameras and you'd be talking about this issue to effectively roll people who won't do the right thing. People who are on the fence, people who might go back to their districts and tell their constituents one thing, and then here up in Albany behind the scenes they'll do another. Well, this is a moment for people to be strong and courageous and bold, and unfortunately that's not what the people of New York are getting right now. I thank all of our assemblymen and senators who are here, and we'll hear in a minute from our Republican leader in the New York State Senate and our New York State Assembly. I look forward to their conferences growing in ranks after this upcoming November 8th, and both conferences will be growing in ranks because the will of the people across the state, Republican to Democrat, independents, conservatives, moderates, liberals, all people realize that right now, one-party rule, outsized power of self-described socialists is not the best path forward for our state. First, I'm really excited to be able to introduce our next lieutenant governor here in the state. Allison Esposito served as the commanding officer of the 70th Precinct in Brooklyn. Her father was a chief in the NYPD. Allison was going to be a chief herself. Her trajectory in the NYPD was this. When I talked to her about issues unrelated to law enforcement, she's spot on, intelligent, she has ideas, a vision, passion. But I'll tell you what, when you get her going on issues like the need to make changes to cashless bail and other public safety changes that are essential, she knows her stuff, and she's strong. She's a strong woman, and I'm excited to know that she is going to be our next lieutenant governor here in the state of New York. I'd like to introduce Allison Esposito.
Good morning, everyone. I am Allison Esposito, and I'm not a politician. I'm not. I stand before you as a cop for more than 24 years who stepped outside of her role as a police officer because one day, sitting as the commanding officer of a police precinct, I looked at the hat I was wearing and the seat that I was sitting in, and I realized it wasn't enough. I realized I had to wear a different hat and put myself in the arena to be able to attempt to save our state. Now, you look at crime statistics as numbers, or you may look at crime statistics as numbers, but they're victims. Every single number is a victim. Every single number affects an entire family. So it's an untold amount of victims that go with each number. Plain and simple, Hochul and Benjamin are not fit to lead. You cannot run away from your mistakes and your problems like you don't have the New York people to answer to. We are here today because we are looking forward to answering to the people of New York. Repealing cashless bail is a must. Kathy Hochul and Brian Benjamin are on the wrong side of this fight. They have chosen the side of criminals. As a cop, as a commanding officer, I watched how crime went down, community and police relationships improved over the almost 25 years I was there. And within the last couple of years, all of those relationships and all of that work went down the toilet because they chose the side of criminals. And each statistic, a victim. I watched as my officers processed 2 and 3 times criminals with loaded firearms taken off of their persons. And they were back in the police precincts getting their property before my officers were finished processing their arrests, back out on the streets. The people that Hochul and Benjamin purport to help, the young kids that may have made mistakes, are not being helped. As people, as children, even as adults, we learn from consequences. The kid that's on the fence that maybe didn't go so far as to carry the gun because there were consequences is now carrying the gun and telling officers, there's nothing you can do about it, I'll be out tomorrow. They're emboldened. And you know what? The next time they carry the gun, maybe they push it too far. And the kid we could have saved, the kid we could have stopped from going down that path, now fires that weapon. Now we have a victim and a kid we lost. So these are the people that Benjamin and Hochul are saying that we're trying to help. They're not helping them, and they're not helping the victims of their crimes. That's why we're standing here before you. That's why it is so important that we make changes and repeal cashless bail. That's why it is so important that we give power to judges. They are there. They're in a position of trust. We place them there. They are there for a reason. They are supposed to evaluate all factors in every crime and make an educated decision. Sweeping changes that come from big government don't do that. Our local municipalities and our judges need that. They need that scope. They need that ability. We are doing New York a disservice. We are doing the victims a disservice. We are standing here before you because this is the change to our state. This is the common sense wave that is taking over our state. And when Congressman Zeldin and I take office on January 1st, we are going to give the New York State that you deserve back to New York. Thank you very much.
Important words, and as you look around this room, you have assemblymen and senators from all across New York. And these state legislators have constituents. And there are millions of New Yorkers who deserve to have a voice and representation in our state capital, who, while we all gather here, there are 3, 4 people hiding out behind closed doors, unwilling to provide the transparency to you and the media, unwilling to provide the transparency to the people of New York, unwilling to provide the voice and representation to all New Yorkers in all regions of the state. And when we gather at this time next year, every single assemblyman and senator who's here, the millions of constituents who they represent, they all are going to have a seat at the table because they all are going to be writing the New York State budget. Now, worst case scenario, Rob Ortt will almost have a majority in the state Senate. Worst case scenario. Guarantee the supermajority gets broken. I know that that's going to happen. It may very well happen just in Nassau County. But as I travel around the state and I'm meeting some of the candidates who have been recruited, there is a possibility on a really good night that the New York State Senate is actually going to flip this November. It's an uphill battle. Worst case scenario, he is going to be close to being the next Senate Majority Leader. Regardless, Rob Ortt and his entire conference are going to be writing next year's state budget as opposed to a totally dysfunctional process that we all have to suffer through right now. Without any further ado, the Senate Republican leader, Rob Ortt.
Well, I want to thank Congressman, soon-to-be Governor Lee Zeldin for that introduction. I want to thank our soon-to-be Lieutenant Governor Esposito. That was a tremendous words that she spoke, and I think the contrast, first of all, couldn't be more clear. The current Lieutenant Governor, a former colleague of mine in the Senate, was a leader in the defund the police movement. Not reinvest the money movement, defund the NYPD movement. The next Lieutenant Governor is going to be a former police captain, someone who is out there, someone who actually protected New Yorkers. And you think about that. We get a lot, this really, I always like to highlight this. My colleagues and even some folks in this room rightfully point out, we talk about the opioid pandemic, drug overdoses, which are, by the way, going up through the roof again. Who's the first person on the scene when there's a drug overdose? Do you think it's somebody here? No, it's a police officer. It's a police officer. When there's a domestic violence, my colleagues and many people in the legislature, we talk about stopping domestic violence, passing laws to stop domestic violence. You know who stops domestic violence? You know who saves victims of domestic violence? Police officers. So this idea that somehow we talk about stopping the flow of illegal guns. But as you just heard, who arrests the person with the illegal gun? The police officer. Who lets him back out? Senate Democrats. That's what's going on. So I get real tired of hearing about, we care about victims of domestic violence. We care about people who are overdosing on drugs. We care about stopping illegal guns. They don't, or they're too dumb to figure out how to do those things. And that might sound mean, but at this point, it's true. And New Yorkers, they want solutions. And the two people you heard just spoke, they have solutions to the easily the number one issue facing New York State, and that is the increase in crime. We're a week away, or give or take, from the adoption of a New York State budget. A budget that will absolutely be over $220 billion. $220 billion. Wow. See, she's not a politician, so that's a big number to her, right? We're all kind of like, yeah. $220 billion, and I'll tell you what, here we are a week out, and no one knows anything. You don't know anything. Members of the majority don't know anything. Because there hasn't been one conference budget committee between the Assembly and the Senate. There hasn't been anything. We get a plan for bail, which is not even a budgetary issue, which the governor could have put in her initial budget presentation, but didn't. She could have put it in her 30-day amendments, but didn't. It gets leaked to the New York Post. And then she couldn't even defend the plan until multiple interviews and requests and getting beat up. How is she going to sell that change to Senator Stewart Cousins or Speaker Hasty when she can't even defend it herself? To me, it looks insincere. It was dropped exactly for the reasons the governor said, or the soon-to-be governor said. It was dropped because she had a bad week. She got a bad poll at the New York Rangers game. 18,000 people said, you're doing a lousy job. You're not protecting New Yorkers. The governor, obviously, her predecessor, you know, he's trying to rehab his image, and that's a problem for her all day long. Because you know what? She was the lieutenant governor when he was the governor. Let's make no mistake. There's no real separation. In 2018, I'm pretty sure the lawn signs said Cuomo Hochul. She's part of that administration. And every time he's running a commercial, it's just a reminder to everybody that she's part of that legacy as well. As much as she would like to run from it, as much as she would like him to fade to the background, he obviously didn't get the memo. But $220+ billion, we said, wow, think of it this way. It's more than the state budgets of Florida and Texas put together. It's closing in on the budget of California. Now, what do all those states have in common? They have a lot more people than New York State. So I always ask the question, why does it cost New York State so much more to run our government than those states? By the way, those states, two of them, that are growing, that have more economic opportunity, that are safer, and that, by the way, pretty soon are going to have more New Yorkers in Texas and Florida than New York. We need an administration that understands this is unsustainable. A revolving door for criminals is unsustainable. Every New Yorker, regardless of your ethnicity, of your political background, expects and deserves a safe neighborhood. They expect and deserve to feel safe when they're walking the streets. They should expect and deserve job opportunities. You want to fix what ails a lot of folks that we spend billions of dollars to try to solve? Give people a job. That'll fix a lot of things. That'll fix people that don't have health care. That'll fix people's ability to feed and pay for their families. A job. But we chase jobs to other states on a regular basis, and then we have to fill the void by raising taxes and spending more money. And now people aren't even safe in whether it's New York City. Rochester is rampant with crime. Buffalo, Syracuse. And I'll close with this. I know they're gonna push for something, and when they adopt this budget, I firmly believe, and you can quote me here, as I know you will, they're gonna claim some victory. They're gonna claim that they did something. We fixed, you know, we did something to stop the crime. They will have done nothing. I promise you, they will have done nothing. And the reason they will have done nothing, because they're telling you they're not going to do anything. The real people, the people who led this charge, Senator Mike Gianaris, Senator Stewart Cousins, Speaker Hasty, they're telling you right now, we're not doing anything. They're not going to restore judicial discretion. They're not interested in doing it. They're not going to take people who get arrested with legal firearms off the street. They've already said as much. And why would we trust the people who broke this system, the people who overturned the system, the people who called for defunding the police? Why would we ever trust those folks to restore public safety ever again? That's why it's an honor for me to be here with my colleagues who, by the way, have stood up and defended our position on repealing cashless bail for the last 2+ years. You didn't have to chase us into an elevator to find out where we stand on this issue. I'll chase you to the elevator to tell you how much it needs to be repealed. And so will the next guy, my colleague in the Assembly, a great leader, and that is Assembly Leader Will Barkley.
Thank you, Leader Ort. It's great to be here this morning. It's great to be with the Congressman and with Allison. You know, Allison mentioned she's not a politician. Well, we might be defined as politicians, but I think everybody in this room is a public servant. We're public servants, and we're trying to do best for New York State. And it's great to be joined here with them. And let me say one other thing. We're talking about cashless bail here. Allison, you're the one person probably most qualified to be here and talking about it. So I'm glad you're making your voice heard on this. I don't do this very often, but I'm going to quote a Siena poll. 91% of New Yorkers feel that crime's a serious issue. 65% think the state's bail reform law should be changed, and 66% of African Americans and Hispanics are worried about being victims of crime. So the Congressman mentioned it, others mentioned it. Why do you think all of a sudden Kathy Hochul's had an epiphany on bail reform? Those numbers, they tend to light it up a little bit. So I think the ultimate question is, how serious is she? And my colleague Rob Ort mentioned, she didn't include it in her budget. She didn't include it in the 30-day amendments. It's going to take more than just a memo. It's going to take more than an op-ed in a paper. It's going to take political capital to get it done. And unfortunately, as mentioned, where's Governor Hochul? Where's the Lieutenant Governor? They've run for cover. They've run for cover. They've hid in elevators, right? Dance around questions, and they won't talk to reporters. So I'll just be brief. The people here in this room, Republicans, law enforcement, crime victims, they know what needs to be done. They know that we have to reform this law. And New Yorkers can't wait. We can't continue to be victims. It has to happen. It has to happen right away. And I know everybody in this room, my colleagues in the Senate and the Assembly, and when we have a new governor, we're going to have good leadership on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader Barkley, Leader Ort, for your words and for having so many members of your conference here. We'll be happy to answer any questions from the media.
Congressman, just yesterday, the Brennan Center came out and said, in the nearly 2 years since implementation, no direct evidence has emerged linking bail reform to rising crime. Mindful of what's been said here today.
You can go back and read through your own stories in the media and apply the facts of those cases to what Kathy Hochul and Brian Benjamin are suddenly putting on the table, and you'll realize that those crimes still would have happened. So when someone's released on an arson and then rearrested on a double manslaughter in Yonkers, we all saw that story, that crime still happens under what Kathy Hochul and Brian Benjamin are currently proposing. They don't include that offense where that person who ended up taking multiple lives, that person still would have gotten released on cashless bail. If you go back and you read through all of the different stories that you all have done such a great job talking about, and you apply it to what they're proposing, even if it was proposed, it was enacted in total, many of these crimes wouldn't have been avoided. Now, in that story you referenced, because I read that as well, a claim was made towards the beginning of it suggesting that there wasn't any rise in crime due to cashless bail. And every single one of your stories, as Allison pointed out, it's not just data. It's a life, it's a family, it's a community that's been impacted. And you can't minimize that to just calling it a number, and you especially can't get away with minimizing it and saying that that didn't happen at all, that cashless bail wasn't a cause whatsoever, because we all know better. And unfortunately, there are too many victims' families who have learned the hardest way possible.
It's my understanding violent crime rose in 90% of the major cities across the country. New York State is the only one that enacted cashless bail. Shouldn't there have been? That's not true. Well, those are some of the numbers I'm reading. If New York State is the only one who has cashless bail, shouldn't we have seen a difference in those numbers?
First off, there's the examples that we were just talking about of people who were released on cashless bail and then went out and committed additional offenses. Those additional offenses would not have been committed if they weren't released on cashless bail. But that's not the only public safety issue. I mean, we also have district attorneys like Alvin Bragg refusing to enforce the law. The governor has the constitutional authority to remove a district attorney who refuses to enforce the law. Alvin Bragg should be removed from office as the district attorney in Manhattan. You have law enforcement who have been abandoned by elected officials. You saw and you heard the pain of the NYPD officers' widows, family, talking recently at the funeral services, desperate for elected officials to have their backs. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. There was a $1 billion defunding of the NYPD that took place about a year and a half ago. You have proposals to, when there's a domestic violence call, to, instead of sending a law enforcement, to send a social worker. That's actually being debated. That's on the table. There's the Less is More Act. When Kathy Hochul signed the Less is More Act, and she shouldn't have, she should have vetoed it, she released 191 people from Rikers Island. A whole bunch of those people immediately went out and committed additional offenses and were rearrested. Now they're talking about a clean slate bill that they're trying to put into the budget that would end up wiping clean across the board all different kinds of offenses that shouldn't just magically disappear because you have some people in power, outsized power of people who think that our streets should belong to criminals instead of law-abiding citizens. You have lethal injection sites popping up inside of the city. You go travel in the subway and you will think that there should be more law enforcement, there should be more lighting, it should be cleaner. There's a homeless issue. There are people who feel like victory for homelessness is just to put a shelter, to put a roof over someone's head. I believe that victory in tackling homelessness is to be able to get somebody out of the shelter and to be able to live their life. You close down Willard as part of closing 6 prisons across the state of New York, and as she's doing it, Kathy Hochul says that we should focus more on drug treatment. Well, why are you closing the only drug treatment center in the entire New York State prison system? There are so many different examples of so many contributing factors. The discovery changes that were made, we hear from law enforcement all the time, and how that has impacted public safety. So there are a lot of contributing factors as to why people don't feel safe on the streets. Cashless bail is the one that I hear about, cited the most, but it's one of many different factors causing crime to go up and for people not to feel safe.
Question for either of the leaders. The Congressman just mentioned discovery reform. The governor's plan does make some changes to discovery reform, as giving DAs a little more wiggle room. Also makes changes to raise the age. Where are your conferences on those changes?
There we go. Well, obviously we support it. It's a step in the right direction, but as I said in my comments, are they serious about doing it? It doesn't look like it. If you look at the record, someone doesn't look like they're serious. As I said, they're running in elevators, they're not taking questions. And if she really was serious about it, why do it now? Why didn't she do it in her budget? Or why didn't she do it in her 30 days amendments? It's a lot easier taking things out of the budget. It's a lot harder putting things in the budget. So we're supportive. We'd like to see the full repeal. That would be our wish. But if not, obviously, any amendments to make cashless bail less of a disaster than it already is, we would support.
John, yes, we have, she's late to the game. We've been calling for these things for, as you know, and many of you have reported for the last several years. But I go back to my statement that, you know who pushed for raise the age? Governor Cuomo, her governor, her boss, her partner. I'll leave it at that. I won't say partner in what, but her partner They were the ones who pushed for this. I mean, so for her to come around now and suddenly say, we need to change it, I just have to question the sincerity. Where was she when we were doing it? Where was her feelings on it then? She was usually, not unlike now in some cases, she didn't have an opinion on the pressing issues of the day. She did not have an opinion of her own. Obviously, that would be different from the governor. But, you know, yes, raise the age. Do we welcome changes to that? Do our counties welcome changes to that? Actual funding that we said would come to administer it? Yeah, I'm sure they would love to see those changes. But how come we didn't do it when we passed it? How come we didn't, you know, so I just have a real distrust of the very folks who advocated for these things, who changed these things, who are now saying, I have the fix now. Now I got it. And by the way, the fix is what my colleagues in the Republican conference have been telling me for the past 3 or 4 or 5 years. So, you know, our conference certainly welcomes those changes, but I think we got to see what those changes are and how tangible and real they are in the final $220+ billion spending plan.
So also in the budget, just for both leaders as well, while bail reform doesn't seem to be making it in, clean slate, as Congressman Zeldin said, is very much on the table. I'm wondering what both of your conferences feel about that.
Well, I'm not going to probably break any major news here, but our conference is very opposed to clean slate. We were opposed last year when they tried to get it in at the end of the session, and they failed because they couldn't even get their entire conference around it. That's how bad it was. And, you know, I think this is a perfect contrast, though. Here we are. Bail reform gets put on the table. You know, repealing cashless bail or changing cashless bail, I shouldn't say repealing it, gets put in 2 weeks out. And clean slate. But only one's going to get there. Not surprisingly, it's clean slate, right? I mean, it isn't. So when we talk about bail reform, the contributing factor, here's what I'll say. Undeniably, crime is up. Undeniably. We can all agree that crime is up in New York. What are our colleagues doing to stem the violence? What are our colleagues doing to stop more victims? They're passing clean slate legislation. That should do it. I mean, it's just, it's unbelievable to me that we can even have this dialogue when we know crime is the most significant issue facing New Yorkers across the board. Their answer in the budget is to wipe away and hide from employers certain crimes, some of which might be really significant, and that you as a customer or a client or even another employee just might want to know.
I think Congressman Zeldin maybe said it, but, you know, now say more than I probably know, but has anyone seen bill text on this? Is there any bill text out there? All we've seen is a memo, and we saw an op-ed. So if that doesn't illustrate how serious or unserious they are about bail reform, I don't know what is. And, you know, I can echo what Rob said. It's a crazy different contrast here, where you have clean slate on one hand and then doing bail reform on the other. It's this whole anti-police narrative that's out there, whole pro-criminal, not helping the victim narrative that's out there, and it's got to be pushed back. So,
if everyone's set on public safety questions, can I ask a quick off-topic or two? Congressman Zeldin, as I think Senator Ort mentioned, former Governor Cuomo has been airing some TV ads. There's some discussion about whether he would get into the race either as a Democratic primary or run as potential independent. If he were to do so, how do you think that changes the nature of the gubernatorial campaign?
Our margin of victory increases. We feel comfortable, confident, optimistic with our plan, our strategy, running head-to-head against Kathy Hochul. Andrew Cuomo might have some support inside of the Democratic Party primary base still. However, it goes downhill very quickly outside of the Democratic Party. Independents in this state, Republicans, conservatives are done with him. So he will be able to pull votes in a November 8th election, but he's going to be pulling almost entirely from Kathy Hochul. Again, selfishly, he's more than welcome to jump in. The war is warm. Unselfishly, I hear everywhere I go throughout the state of New York concern from New Yorkers still demanding justice and accountability. And I'm sure that there are some Democrats over in the state assembly who regret not impeaching him.
And also in the budget, there is discussion about a potential gas tax holiday or a suspension. A rebate program has been put out there as well. I think California is maybe doing something similar on that front. What would you like to see done on the gas tax going forward?
I would like to see many different things get done to drive down energy costs in the state. One is a suspension of the gas tax, but that's not it. My personal opinion, speaking for myself, is that New York State should be safely extracting natural resources that we have here in our own state. We sit on the Marcellus and Utica shales. Other states are tapping into the same exact resource, the same exact shales, and none of the fear-mongering that takes place in this city that ended up leading to a ban is actually happening in these other places. These are named after New York towns. There are people who can be put to work, revenue generated for the state, local economies that can be revitalized, energy costs that can be driven down. I also believe that Albany needs to greenlight new pipeline applications. There are pipeline applications that have been dormant, others that have been denied, and the consequences are dire. When Bill de Blasio and Jumaane Williams and AOC rallied their friends against the Williams pipeline, it ends up leading to a decision. Con Ed and National Grid decide that they have to ban gas hookups on new construction, and then the New York City Council actually ends up passing a new bill to do it. And now these geniuses who are hiding out in a room, unwilling to talk to you all or give a seat at the table to the rest of these legislators from around the state, they believe that we should ban gas hookups on all new construction all throughout New York. That also is the wrong answer. I saw a press release that came out just a few weeks ago where the Public Service Commission and National Grid was entering into a deal where National Grid would be allowed to increase energy costs, not decrease, increase energy costs in exchange for National Grid withdrawing an application for a new pipeline. That's the opposite of government working. And people right now are citing many different reasons why they're fleeing this state. We're here today to talk about crime and public safety, but a lot of people are leaving because they feel like their money will go further if they go somewhere else. They can't afford to survive. They're seeing the price of oil in their tank. They're seeing the price of food, of having to fill up their car. And the push in Albany is that we should be only selling electric vehicles. Or they should pass a budget that bans all gas hookups. The gas tax is one piece of this, absolutely, and the gas tax should be suspended, but that's not the only thing that we should be doing. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Speaker part.
Yes. Good job. I was waiting for my intro. Yeah, Rob took it. I was going to talk about.
Well, that's right. I did kind of take it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You knocked me right out, Rob. He had a rip on his palm. He never looked at it.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Thank you.